Good afternoon, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here at Nationwide at 5. I'm Cliff Hughes.
Good afternoon, Cliff. Good afternoon, listeners. I'm Ricardo Brooks.
How you do?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. Well, in our cover story this afternoon, the chairman of the Fiscal Advisory Committee, Keith Duncan, is warning that there's no fiscal space for the government to give away goodies during the upcoming budget. In a column in the Sunday Gleaner yesterday, Mr. Duncan says the country's economic stability was achieved through great sacrifice and prudent management of resources. He says this was done across successive administrations.
Mr. Duncan says this prudent management has allowed the country to increase allocations and spending in the areas of education, health, wages and salaries, capital expenditure, infrastructure projects, investments in the national security capacity within the security forces, social programs, and the safety net for the vulnerable. According to him, public sector wages have moved from $222 billion in the 2021 to 2022 financial year to a projected spend of $424 billion in the current financial year.
Mr. Duncan says for the same period, wages and salaries have increased from 19.58% of gross domestic product, GDP, to 13.15%. He says the wages as a percentage of tax revenues moved from 36% to 46%.
That's 9.58% to 13.15%. Mr. Duncan says these significant increases will likely crowd out other critical areas of spending, and he's warning that there's no space for an increased income tax threshold, and I'm sure a lot of people won't be happy to hear that. He's warning politicians against over-promising during the lead-up to the next general election due September of this year. Mr. Duncan says the parties should instead seek to outline to voters how they can build on the foundation of the hard-won macroeconomic stability to drive inclusive growth for the Jamaican economy. Keith Duncan joins us now. We're also being joined by Chartered Accountant Dennis Chung. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dennis. Afternoon, Cliff.
Good afternoon. Mr. Duncan, tell us, you are now the chairman of the Fiscal Advisory Council, and in that job, what is your principal mandate?
Okay, so let me first say thank you very much for having me, Nationwide family, and I am not speaking in the capacity of the Fiscal Advisory Committee chairperson. At this point in time, I am speaking as a former chairman of EPOC and as a citizen of Jamaica. The Fiscal Advisory Committee and the Commission is not up and running. It's as yet, and it's set to up and running in January of this year, where they are in the process of recruiting and getting the Commission up and running. So there have been no formal meetings of the Fiscal Advisory Committee as yet, and for us to have these discussions and to ventilate them within the Fiscal Advisory Committee in an advisory role to the chairman, to the Fiscal Commissioner, Mr. Courtney Williams. Just to be clear on that one, right? Okay, but if the role of the Fiscal Advisory Committee is to provide advice and guidance and to share our perspectives as the civil society grouping that sits as the Fiscal Advisory Committee to the Fiscal Commissioner, and that will then be recorded in the minutes of these Fiscal Advisory Committee meetings, and then there will be dialogue with the Fiscal Commissioner to ensure that we're abiding by our fiscal rules, that our budgets and our expenditures and our revenue assumptions for growth of the economy, exchange rate, interest rate assumptions, all are reasonable, and therefore will meet muster in terms of the ability to achieve budgeted targets.
All right.
So just before we move from that, Keith Duncan, essentially this is a tool we're developing as a society, still growing, still learning, much to learn, that your body, you meaning the Commission, the Fiscal Commission, is to be the organization that the people of Jamaica, the public of Jamaica, can store some confidence and trust in. So we'll hear from the Prime Minister, we'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition, we'll hear from the other spokesmen and women, but it is the Fiscal Commission's duty, and it will be staffed and resourced, to
Yes.
examine the data, the performance, and to say, yes, this is prudential, or
Yes.
no, this is careless and reckless.
That is true. But you have to make it sound so dramatic, Cliff.
I'm a communicator.
Okay, boss.
But let me ask you then, Keith Duncan, the Jamaican.
So I wanted to also correct the headline, right? What I said in my column was that we have to be careful. Our political parties, not the government, and I made no reference to the budget of the government. The political parties have to be very careful from making impractical or over-promising within their campaigns, because the budget is in the interim policy paper. The government has already set out parameters of where they're spending where the expenditures are outlined to be, right, at a high level. You understand what I'm saying? So therefore, if you hear within the budget, the Prime Minister comes in his speaks to capital expenditures, that is because Jamaica has budgeted $69 billion for the year 25-26 for capital expenditures. So that's not equal.
We're sort of losing you. We're sort of losing you, Keith Duncan.
Could you repeat that for us? Your line started to act up there.
Okay. So the point I was making that in the interim fiscal policy, which was tabled October 8th, the high-level budgetary expenditures are set for
No,
expenditure.
just hold it there first. Just hold it there first, Keith. We're going to check your line because it's giving us a little bit of a challenge. Dennis Chung?
Yes, I'm here.
I know you've read the article published yesterday. But do you agree with most of the conclusions Keith Duncan makes?
Yeah, I think Keith is correct. The parties obviously have to be careful. Well, I mean, I don't even think they will be careful. I think they'll go out and promise, because the truth is that they've long done this, and this is why we almost fell off a fiscal cliff in 2013. So you're going to have some promises, but we have to be mindful as a people that when these promises are made, that we're going to properly scrutinize them and ensure that it can be delivered, because Keith is correct in saying that within the context of the fiscal policies that we want to pursue and being fiscally responsible, not everything that's promised they're going to be able to deliver. Of course, the Fiscal Commission is there, and they have the responsibility, of course, of ensuring that the fiscal rules are followed. Remember, we have certain fiscal rules that we have to obey. So, everyone can promise anything they want, and I'm sure that people will make promises, and some of the promises are very nebulous. I mean, they don't get specific, They're saying, boy, we will do this, we will do that, and, we will make these people's lives better without saying how it's going to happen. But I think when they say that, it also betrays their understanding of the real issue.
Well, we have one specific promise from the opposition leader. He'll spend $40 billion more to ease the plight of the poorest Jamaicans. Keith Duncan penned an article in the Sunday Gleaner, Fiscal Risks Loom Large. Growth is the panacea. And before the break, Dennis, you were making the point that the Jamaican people will have to be discerning in listening to the promises that will come from the political platforms. We have a specific promise and a specific amount from the opposition leader. He has said $40 billion more needs to be spent to ease the cost of living crisis, to ease the fact that the poorest Jamaicans are struggling. Am I hearing you correctly in saying that that's a pipe dream?
Well, I mean, it don't even get to a dream, because, you tell me you're going to spend $40 billion. Okay, how are you going to generate that? How are you going to spend it? How is it going to make my life better? Because we have, over the years, we've increased public sector salary over and over again, and we are worse off than we were before. Because if let's just say you have that $40 billion to spend, if you just throw it into a social program, you're going to create inflation. In 10 months' time, everybody's going to be worse off, right? So we have to be very careful about what is being said to us, and we have to understand how it's going to be done, because the truth is that just throwing money at the problem is not going to solve the problem. We have some structural issues to fix, right? And unless we fix those issues, then someone can throw $100 billion at us. If there's no productivity increase and that $100 billion comes in 12 months' time, I guarantee you, you're going to be in a worse situation than you were the 12 months before.
And Keith Duncan,
just before you go back to Keith, Dennis, isn't that part of the crux of the problem we're faced with? That the Holness administration, in giving the big increases to the public sector, did not pin down in measurable ways how to make sure we got value in terms of increased productivity.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I agree. I mean, and at the time it was happening, I would say that we need to ensure that the increase comes with greater productivity. Because if that does not happen, right, and we've seen it over and over and over again, I think that the rationalization of the public sector that was done was good to some degree, but what we needed to come with it is the accountability. So therefore, you get a $10 increase, but I need to see $12 of productivity coming behind it, or else I'm going to have a big problem after that. And I think that is what Keith is referring to. And that is something we need to be very careful of, because it's not difficult for us to get back to 2013, if we're not careful. It's not difficult.
Yes. Keith Duncan?
You're right. So Keith Duncan, you seem to be priming public sector workers to telling them to lower their expectations in the coming cycle of wage negotiations.
Correct. I think we all need to bring the awareness as to where we are with our fiscal affairs and the fiscal outlook that we have as a country, right? And the fiscal envelope that we have that is to share up for all different stakeholders and all competing priorities, right? That is very important that everyone understands as a country where we are. All stakeholders, including the public sector, the private sector, and our wider population, they need to understand. And therefore, I am just sharing that the envelope that we have has become somewhat compressed because of the increases in the wages and salaries over the period, where wages and salaries have increased as a percentage of even tax revenues have increased to 46% and set to increase to 48% next year, moving from $424 billion to $463 billion, right? So the increase in wages and salaries continue to increase as a percentage of tax revenue, and therefore it reduces the flexibility in terms of expenditures in other areas, so it needs to be managed. So in terms of, we have to manage the expectations of the public sector, of all stakeholders who are looking to get allocations in their whatever resources that they're seeking from the government of Jamaica. Because if we look at it and we look at even the capital expenditure, we are set to spend $69 billion in capital expenditure next year, right? We're set to spend $336 billion in programs next year. That's 25-26. But that program, that program expenditure falls from $359 billion. It makes room for the compensation of employees, which goes from $424 to $463 billion. So we have limited space, and with the economy slowing a bit due to burial and all of the challenges we have had with Rafael, etc., and the slowdown and the travel advisories, and the marginal slowdown in tourism, it puts up pressure on revenue. So we have to be aware of where we are as a country, right? Mm-hmm. And in our fiscal affairs, and to manage our expectations to ensure, as Dennis was pointing out, that we maintain macroeconomic stability. I was making a point when the phone kind of was when we lost connection around the fact that I was not in a budget. The budget is already kind of laid out at a high level in the interim fiscal policy of October 8th, where it sets the high level parameters. So therefore, within the budget, there are spending and there are revenue items, and therefore, when the government of Jamaica lays out its budget, it will then say how it intends to spend what it has, which is not the same as election goodies, because they have already budgeted, as I just mentioned, $69 billion for capital expenditure and other expenditure items. So therefore, that's not equal to election goodies. Mm-hmm. The point I was making was that there have been there are two main areas that we have to be careful of, and that is one, increase in the income tax threshold, which is very costly, right? And maybe we just don't have the fiscal space for, and also the fact that we should not look to spend more than we earn in relationship to our fiscal rules, right? And curtail the reduction in the debt reduction strategies. We're going to be at 68% at the end of this fiscal year, and we have to get to 60% in 2027-28. Another point I'd like to make is that for 25, 26, and 26, 27, due to the fact that we have made the adjustments and we are back on track in terms of the debt reduction, that we can actually run deficits, and projected in the fiscal policy paper is a $19 billion deficit in 25, 26, and a $22 billion deficit in 26, 27, because we have caught up in terms of our debt reduction strategies. So we are already running deficits 0.6% of GDP in 25, 26, and 26, 27. That is programmed.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So therefore, we don't need to, should we go and spend more than what was already programmed as a deficit inside, in alignment with our fiscal rules? I don't think so. I would not recommend that.
Yeah. Keith, I want you to explain. This financial year about to end, we are underperforming in terms of capital expenditure. The last figure I saw, $19 billion, plus another $9 billion a year before. Yes? Tell us, for the uninitiated, does that mean the government has that money sitting down somewhere that it could now utilize?
Well, I think I cannot answer that in 100%, but I know it goes back into the consolidated fund, and I know that there are some elements that they can't carry over. I know that they can carry over contingencies, but I'm not sure if they can carry over the entire number, right? I heard Minister Williams speak to a $11 billion contingency, but I'm not sure exactly what that specific figure is that they could carry over. Dennis might have a thought on it.
Dennis?
No, they can't carry over capital expenditure. As to the question, I think you have more in mind if the cash is there. And it could be that the cash is there because they have been not doing so badly on the revenue side. So the cash might be there because the cash would be available for spending. It's just that maybe going through all the procurement rules and everything. But once the year runs out, all that money goes back to the ministry and they have to restart again. So, that money is just not going to be there if it runs out.
Yeah.
Going forward.
And Dennis, the situation Keith laid out seems to set up the classic case of politics versus the economy. Because I hear Keith Duncan and he laid it out well. But there is another argument to be made, particularly in this year, with a government facing an election. How do you see the government balancing those interests? The sound fiscal discipline that Keith advocates for and everybody agrees needs to be maintained, and the fact that there's a political reality. The government is facing a buoyant opposition. 8 months to go before it must return to the people for a fresh mandate. Yeah,
well, I mean, based on how I see this government operate, I don't think they're going to be fiscally irresponsible. So an increase in the threshold, I don't see it being programmed. But I see that the expenditure is going to continue on capital projects, things like public transportation, things like getting cheaper energy down. Those things can improve people's lives without just putting money in their hands, right? And I think that is how they are programmed to spend. So it's not just a matter of taking up 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 billion and giving it to people, but saying, let me spend the money. So let's look at the situation, the roads, for example. Maybe all of that money was not projected to be spent, but there are certain expenditures that even if you don't project it, you have to find a way for them to happen because it improves productivity. And that's where I see that the expenditure is going to happen. So if you look at the focus areas, building out infrastructure in terms of the roads, let's just look at, for example, the Montego Bay bypass. You know how much productive time is going to be gained from just that alone, right? And that's the sort of expenditure I think that will happen. So even the social housing program, which I think is a very good program, right? Because the expenditure that I'm seeing is geared more towards making people more productive. And I expect, certainly, based on what I have seen, I expect that certainly within 3 to 4 months to the middle of the year, I think that we're going to start feeling the effects of the reduction in crime. And that is going to be the pivotal moment. So we've seen the reductions happening statistically, but I think you'll start feeling it soon if we continue on that trend. I think we'll start feeling the better roads that we're driving on, right? The public transport, I think that we could go a little quicker with that, right? And once we start feeling those things, then we're not even going to have to increase the threshold or increase revenues, because there's a lot of efficiency gains that can come from all of that by increasing productivity within the revenue that we have. And I think that's where we need to focus. And I think that's the argument that Keith is making also. It's a very sound argument.
We have to go bring you back and Keith, because we're past the news time. Okay. And Keith Duncan, I haven't been able to reach yet the point you make about fixing the public sector wage bill as a percentage of GDP that we need to return to some
index to inflation or index to some level of KPIs around productivity.
Exactly. And the looming wage negotiations with the public sector unions, how that may play. Yes, because it goes back to the politics of the moment that we're in. Yes, we have to go bring it back, the two of you, to complete this discussion, gentlemen. But thanks, Keith Duncan. You did the country some public service yesterday. Yeah, and we need more voices like this.
Thank you very much, Cliff.
Good.
You know, Cliff, I hear the Labourites, they've coined a new term. They said this is the stay with it government. The People's National Party has never escaped the mantra of run with it. The Labourites are saying this is
stay with it.
Stay with it. Let's see. Let's see if it resonates.
Yes.